Hello, I'm Captain James D. Kirk. Let's start. No way. I'm not Captain James D. Kirk. I'm Truth Surge, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Hey everyone, welcome to Atheist Edge, and I'm Jim, and I'm here with Chris today.
So we just read this book, as the book Not God's Type by Dr. Holly Ordway. She is a former atheist turned Anglican turned Catholic.
Roman Catholic. Yeah.
Roman Catholic. Interesting read. Raised some of our hackles a little bit just because of some of the points that she brings up, especially about herself as an atheist and the way she kind of connected that and expanded her feelings about her atheism to atheism as a whole.
All right, so we should preface this by saying that Chris and I are members of a atheist and Christian book club that meets once a month. This current month, last night was the last one, and we read that book prior and then talked about it. It was funny to see the look on all the Christians' faces when they realized that it had really touched a nerve with us non-believers, because when they read it, they didn't see how we could have gotten so offended.
Yeah, there's some ideas about atheism that are so stereotypical
Tired
at this
tropes.
point. Yeah, that I came across in this book. I come across with Christians that I deal with online, and so I know, Jim, you were very upset at some of the things that she was saying. I was certainly disappointed.
I was kicking
to be
myself
sure.
for having such an emotional reaction to it, because I pride myself on being cold, hard logic. But this one really got me emotionally distressed.
It's hard not to be sometimes
Yeah.
when you have people who think they know you even though they've never met you, and think that just because they've met a particular atheist or had a particular experience of themselves as an atheist that you necessarily are on board with that. It's really the same as if we were to lump all theists in the same group. Theists are they're a hugely diverse group of people with a wide variety of beliefs and a wide variety of views on life. And the idea that you can lump all atheists into that same category is just, it gets frustrating after a while.
Yeah, what if we said, all you Christians, all of you, just a lump sum, a blanket statement that all of you really know that you're full of shit, and you really just do it because you are afraid of the dark and afraid of death, and how would that make a Christian feel? That's basically.
Well, they would say that doesn't represent me. That doesn't represent how I look at life. And yeah, I think it's one of those issues that can only be resolved by having groups like the book club, where atheists and Christians can actually meet each other, talk to each other in real life, not just talk to other atheists about Christians or talk to other Christians about atheists. You get to know people and you find out, they're really kind of different than how I thought they were. But point being, we thought it would be pertinent to kind of look at this book, take a deep dive into some of the things that she says specifically, not just about atheism, but about her own conversion into Christianity, things that are either patently false, don't logically follow, don't make sense. There's a wealth of stuff we could go into.
Contradictions.
But we
Inconsistencies. Big inconsistencies.
Big inconsistencies.
Let me also say that there's going to be 72. This is probably almost without a doubt. This is going to be multiple parts. This will be a series. I'll say a couple things about it. First off, it's 72 excerpts that we took from the book that we found interesting, and the part of the author, Dr. Ordway, will be played by Shannon Q from the Shannon Q podcast, and which we're really lucky to have gotten her. And we thank her. I'm probably going to end up thanking her some more, but...
At the time I became a Christian outwardly, I seemed to have my act together. But I was inwardly wounded, having just come out of a disastrous long-term relationship.
First, I'll say, it seems like the first thing I thought when I heard that was, you know, a lot of these conversion stories seem to have occurred when you're at a really low point in your life. This is her after a bad breakup. Some other things happened later in the book, but it's usually a low point in your life when maybe you go to jail. I mean, maybe you're at the bottom of your barrel. Something really bad happens in your life, a loss of a family member that just devastates you. And it feels like maybe you have no one else to, like God sometimes, a lot of times, not sometimes, a last resort. Or maybe you've run out of friends. Maybe you get your drug habit and everyone's abandoned you. And then you turn to God. And Christians, when they tell their conversion story, they wear that like a badge of honor. Like, you know, God pulled me out of my nothingness.
Yeah, anyone who's ever been to a church where someone gets up there and shares their testimony knows that the lower your low point is, the better your testimony is. And this will be a running theme throughout the book, the idea that she was brought to a vulnerable state by various things in her life. She talks about this breakup. She also talks about, you know, being in a underwhelming, underperforming job, and, you know, various things that put her in a state where she may have been more receptive to Christianity than it would be in her tough intellectual atheist days.
Well, as long as I'm thinking about it too, when you talked about a receptive state of mind, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't think this at the time, but two people at the book club meeting, they mentioned, and I didn't get this when I was reading it, but they were certain that Dr. Ordway maybe had feelings for her fencing coach, which you'll find out later is the big influence that drove her to Christianity. And I didn't see a budding, you know, because, you know, the fencing coach is married, and maybe she is something that she couldn't have, but they thought that maybe she developed feelings for him, and he was so influential that, you know, it might have been a budding romance.
Yeah, I personally didn't see that. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt that it wasn't quite that extreme or juicy, I guess. She did mention, and I think we get to that later on in these points, that her fencing coach and her fencing coach's wife were the first nice, well thought out, well read Christians that she had ever met.
Yep.
So I think that in of itself was intriguing to her, and it made her more interested in pursuing Christianity than it would have been otherwise, than if she had never met them.
I'm going to lean towards your take on it as well. I just thought it was interesting.
The cross, to put it bluntly, is where all the
words in and of themselves have no intrinsic meaning. They are just letters on a page. When letters are combined in a certain way, they can give a meaning that we have prescribed as a society. That's what that means. To put SH and then dash out the IT is to, I don't know, maybe you want to, maybe you're afraid of offending the Christian readers, but putting the SH on the page, you've already put the word in their head. You've already done what you didn't want to do. And the only thing you're doing is making yourself look, I mean, the only difference between SH dash dash and shit is it's semantics. It's keeping a persona.
We're talking minor literary stylistic points here, but if you want to say shit, say shit. If you don't want to say shit, don't put half of shit in there. Put an entirely different word. You're a fucking English professor. Come up with something else to say. I don't know why she felt like she was trying to be, you know, edgy and cool, but she couldn't be edgy and cool and offend her Christian readers with language.
Exactly.
So she was, I think this is literally the only point in the book that she does this, which makes it all the more weird that she couldn't come up with a workaround. But it's not the biggest problem in the book by far.
Yeah, and you mentioned she's a English professor. She did her dissertation on Tolkien. You know, I expected more from this book. It is not written like someone of her caliber. It is written several levels below that. It sounds like I wrote the damn thing. I expected more out of this. It wasn't eloquent. There's some really wonky timelines in it that made it look like her realization of being an atheist, and then we'll talk about this later, and then her realization that maybe there's something out there godlike. We're within just a few paragraphs of each other.
Yeah, we'll get into the timeline later. Stylistically, I mean, we've all been in school and we've read supposedly great literature that we found tedious and boring. And, you know, this guy, Gerard Manley Hopkins, that she keeps going back to, one of her favorite poems in the world. She can't stop speaking his praises. And I read it, and it's just nonsense. And obviously, I haven't studied it as an English student in a doctoral program or anything like that. But, you know, some literature speaks to other people more than others. And, you know, she's a professor, and I'm sure there's some people who are thoroughly entranced by her prose and the rest of us are just, and that's just the way it goes.
Do you agree, though, that this book really, it lacked, you would expect a wider range of vocabulary, first off. You would expect a more eloquent writing style, or was it just me? It seemed like, based on her expertise, this should have been a more beautiful read.
It could very well be that either she was tailoring it, or her editor was tailoring it towards a less academic audience. It would be very easy for her to. She probably has a very advanced vocabulary that 90% of us would just be totally lost by. So for the sake of accessibility, I'm willing to bet that
That's
somewhere that she didn't bring her full professorialness to bear on her word choices or grammar and so forth.
Well, you know this. Yeah, this was a rewrite. So you know there was an original version, and it was an extensive rewrite.
Yeah, that makes even more sense.
The first version of this book was for academics. It was an academic,
I think that was mentioned last night,
journal.
And I could absolutely see that.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
5 precious wounds that he bears now and forever in his risen and glorified body.
Yeah, one thing she was talking in very effuse ways about how, you know, Christ's death and resurrection and the miracle working change it made in her life and its effects on, you know, breaking the bonds of sin on humanity as a whole and whatnot. And one interesting question that I like to run by people is, did Christ's suffering do that for you, or did your belief in Christ's suffering do that for you?
What do you mean?
So the idea is, you know, by his actions on the cross, Jesus, you know, broke the bonds that are keeping us in our sinful ways and are opening us up to a new, more profound, more vibrant life. And you can certainly see Christians who turn their life around when they convert and they find hope they never had before, they find joy they never had before. Certainly Ordway is one of these people. But my question would be, you know, she came to believe this stuff, and she found, we're going to get to meaning definitely later.
Oh yeah,
but you know, she found this new meaning she had before, or she didn't have before in her life, and I think that was just because her new belief, like, it wasn't like, I mean, we don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead at all. So Jesus rising from the dead could not have had an effect on anyone. And I think that, you know, people find hope and meaning in all kinds of beliefs, not just Christianity. People find meaning in the stars and astrology, or any one of under 900 religions. And it seems like you can't necessarily map finding meaning with finding truth.
And don't Christians talk like, it's all too often they speak like they have got they've cornered the market on meaning. Like no one else can have it. It's unique only to their particular flavor of Protestant Christianity, and they've got they got the monopoly on it. No one else has it.
Yeah, they have the real meaning, and everyone else is just faking it to get
Right.
by.
What jumped out at me on this was that first part, 5 precious wounds that he bears now. It's just something particularly sinister or macabre or just sickening that Christians have this eager penchant of the glorification of blood and the violence as a sacrifice, that they revel in it, and when they talk about the poor, I don't know how often you go to actual sermons, but the pastor will just lick his lips in anticipation of talking about the flowing blood of Christ. It just seems sickening in a way.
Yeah, anyone who's seen The Passion of the Christ knows. I mean, Mel Gibson is a Catholic. I think he's a particularly extreme Catholic, but there's this. Yeah, there's almost a bloodlust.
Yeah.
And, what struck out for me is that, you didn't grow up in the church, so maybe you didn't have the same experience. But, coming out of the church and looking at it from the outside, there's certain phrases, certain ideas that, you kind of take for granted growing up in it that seem really bizarre when you think about it. Like, I'm eating the body of Christ, or I was saved by the blood of the Lamb.
Yeah, exactly.
And she had the opposite experience. Like, she came into Christianity and Catholicism from the outside, and she's not at all fazed by these saying phrases, even though she was brand new to them at some point. She even goes as far to defending transubstantiation as a Catholic doctrine, where she believes she is literally eating the body and blood of Christ. And that's cool with her. It's just one of those weird things that Christians think is normal, and everyone else is like, what the hell are you guys doing?
Just under no circumstances no universe I could find myself viewing the inflicted wounds of another person as precious, quote unquote. It just doesn't register with me.
I delighted in thinking of myself that way. I got a kick out of being an unbeliever. It was fun to consider myself superior to the unenlightened, superstitious masses and to make snide comments about Christians.
Yeah, let's just look up the next couple points. But she takes her atheism and her particular blend of atheism, and she extends it to all atheists.
Yep.
And
that's why we're doing this response video.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's an autobiographical book, so I expect her to share her own story. But she doesn't always phrase things like, I, as an atheist, thought this. She phrases things as, atheism does this necessarily. And we'll get into it, but that's not a good way to get your point across to people.
Yeah. It's at best, it's poisoning the well, and it's setting up a straw man writ large. Just it's a blanket stereotype, overgeneralization, mischaracterization of my entire atheist community.
Yeah, I wonder if this book was written to include potentially an atheist audience, because I think if she was trying to write the book to reach out to atheists, she wouldn't include such broad generalizations in it. I think that would, as we've seen, it would turn people off.
I know I'll bring it up again, but at no point in this book does she at even one time bring up, the closest she comes is she talks about all the atheist books she has read, but she never says which books. She never describes any of her atheist influences. When she didn't become a Christian until 30, 31. She was already working on her master's, or no, she was in a doctoral program when she converted.
Yeah, we had someone there last night, Dan, who's been on this program before, and he was actually a student of hers, and he pointed out that as part of their coursework, they read a wide variety of atheist literature. Now, I didn't get to follow up on him and ask, but I can't imagine that, she has all this atheism literature, and she's never encountered, like, secular humanism or one of the more optimistic flavors of atheism. It's all, she insists it has to be doom, gloom, despair all the way down.
What does no, okay, also it's probably already on our channel as well. We mirrored it'll be mirrored by the time you watch this, but at the Atheist Christian Book Club on Facebook, the video last night we got to watch 4 pre-recorded Skype interviews. We couldn't get Dr. Ordway, but we did get her fencing coach, and Bill, the one of the co-founders, he's the atheist side of the equation. He got to interview Holly's fencing coach, and this was pointed out to him, and he said, well, no, Holly had lots of atheist friends, and she was very influenced by atheism. She read a lot of atheism, but that's all well and good, but why not mention it in this book?
If anything, that would help her narrative.
Yeah.
I would think that would boost her atheist credentials.
Yeah.
She does say like once that she hung out with a bad crowd of atheists or something along those lines. But it's hard to say. I mean, she probably was in college in the 90s maybe, and I don't know how wide open atheist student groups were at that time. Certainly at a secular university, it would probably be easier to be an atheist then.
And say what you will, whenever you hear the term new atheist, it's usually as a pejorative, and it's usually by a believer. I hesitate to ever use that word, new atheist. Atheism as a community did get a little more outspoken, probably, I don't know, when do you think it got really big? Mid-2000s? But prior to that, there were I was a very outspoken atheist in the 80s. It was a thing. This new atheism isn't so new. And you could have represented the people you could have spoken about your influences while you were still an atheist a little bit more, or at all. You could have named maybe 1 or 2 books that you read and maybe dissected a little bit, but she glanced right over it.
Yeah, there are certain times when, this book was a pretty tight read, which I appreciated. But there are certain areas that I wish she had gone into a little bit more detail about, and I think this is one of them.
Then I was looking for something, purpose, meaning, satisfaction. But since I did not then believe that God existed, it did not, and indeed could not, occur to me that what I was searching for would be found in God.
Okay. This comes up a lot, and of course this is the main reason we decided to make a response. But here she goes again with, inferring that she has, as a believer now, she's got she's cornered the market on meaning and purpose. And, she alludes to it, that maybe atheists do their best to find purpose and meaning, but of course it's self-imposed. It's it doesn't come from on high, and ultimately it ends in failure. And you'll see later that she talks about us walking in darkness, and then we really have this hole in our heart, and that we're lost without the true purpose and meaning. And at the book club last night, I brought up to one of the believers, because they had directed that question at me, and I said, well, do I seem on the face of it as happy as you are? Of course, yeah. You seem just as happy as me. Well, how would you explain that? Is there really something? Do you think I go home and this is all a facade? And do you really think that this is all just window dressing? And I go home and I'm just wallow in my despair and depression when no one's looking?
Yeah, once again, she was despairing and found meaning in God. Therefore, every atheist must despair and should find meaning in God.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God, this woman. Such was my life as an atheist. Now, when I consider my life before I knew Christ, I recognized how limited my vision was.
It's entirely possible that her vision was entirely accurate and she had her eyes open to a realm that does not actually exist.
Yeah. Even when she speaks about her early days when she was still an ardent atheist, she concedes that she was not a very happy person, and she felt like she was walking in darkness, walking aimlessly. Later on, she'll talk about her fencing and how that was quote unquote a saving grace, and because it gave her purpose and meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze the woman or anything like that, but I have to imagine, she was pretty down, and if it wasn't Christianity that gave her hope for a future, it probably would have been something else. Like, she kind of latched onto something that gave her an excuse to find happiness and joy, and really good for her. I mean, I'm not going to disparage anyone for who finds their hope in Christianity. I disagree with it, obviously, but I get it. But I feel like if she had met a Mormon person who was happy and welcoming, she might be a Mormon today.
Not just might. I think she was ready. She was going to grasp onto anything that came along. Mm-hmm. And here's the ironic part. She already had fencing. That is a totally viable thing to grasp onto for some purpose in the world. Mm-hmm. Martial arts for me, then chess, Marine Corps, doing something that matters in this world. I have, and now it's this podcast. You find something you like, you put your passion into it. There's a lot to be said for that. Don't minimize that. So much joy can come of just your passions in life. The ironic part was she already had something that she was really good at a competitive level, and I don't think she gave it the credit it deserves. And also she was looking for something more. That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead, look for and go be a Christian too. Mm-hmm. But don't lump us all into the same boat like we all need it.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do a whole separate video about this, but there's an idea that if that meaning isn't capital M meaning with sprinkles on top, if it's not eternal and permanent and transcendent, and I don't think it's necessarily the case.
Yep.
May have to pause to vomit. It had never occurred to me that there could be a path to faith in God involving reason, or that there might be evidence for the claims of Christianity.
Okay, if faith is arrived at through reason and evidence, how is the word faith any different than the word trust, confidence, or knowing? So you got trust, you got the word confidence, you got the word knowing. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I'm going to allude to this later, but what makes faith a unique word? If when you say the word faith, you mean either trust or confidence or knowing, depending on the context, what makes faith, that word, unique in its meaning? Mm-hmm. And why is that word even needed?
Yeah, there are certainly some times in the Bible where you can substitute the word faith for the word confidence, trust, and it'll go just fine. The difference is faith is brought in as the means to salvation, because then you run into issues where, okay, if you want to talk about faith as confidence, you can have various levels of confidence in things. And if you can have various levels of confidence in the death of Christ as the means to salvation, justification with God, then okay, what's the confidence threshold? Is it 50% confidence? Is it 75% confidence? And Christians themselves, they will use faith as like a currency almost, where the more faith you have, the better off you are. And
because all you need is a mustard seed size, and you can move mountains, right?
Faith is not an all or nothing thing. I mean, you can either trust God or you don't trust him at all. You don't trust God.
Now you're kind of using it as a synonym for trust. See, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe a decade or two ago, faith had a different meaning than it does now. With this rise of you trying to inject reason into it and apologetics, I think faith, it's gotten more bulletproof. Back then, faith meant a leap of faith. It meant, like Hebrews 11:1, it meant knowing something without any evidence, knowing without seeing. And if you try to bring up Hebrews 11:1 nowadays to a Christian, oh, no, that's not what they meant. They backpedal from it like it's cool now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on how you translate that verse. I've seen it translated as things like assurance. So I'm not sure what the original language.
Assurance of things not seen. I mean, it's pretty plain in the Bible that faith is knowing without evidence. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, they back away from that definition.
Not everyone. I mean, there's definitely some people who will take faith. Like I said, they'll treat faith like the more of it you have, the better off you are, and you want to be overflowing with it. Where it gets really interesting is where they start conflating faith in God with faith in science or something like that.
Right.
And that's where they start really fucking with the meanings of things.
That's called the tu quoque or tu quoque fallacy, where, oh, well, yeah, we might be like that, but so are you.
Well, it's equivocation. They're changing the value, the meaning of the words on the fly. Like when, if you want to say an atheist has faith in science, that really does mean we have confidence in science and the scientific method to help us understand the natural world and how everything works. And that's not the same thing as saying I have confidence or I have faith that Jesus Christ is going to return someday and bring me to heaven. Because one, you can find the proof in the pudding of science all day long. And the other one is based on I like this book a whole lot. It's not the same thing.
Right. Well, again, anytime you hear a non-believer, scientist, or both use faith, it's a different meaning, but it's more synonymous with confidence and trust.
Yeah.
Based on historical precedent. That's the difference. It's not just trust. When we say we have, let's say you happen to hear me say I have faith the sun's going to come up tomorrow. That's based on the sun has come up for the last half century that I've seen. You know, it's based on a historical precedent. So I just don't blindly say I think a sun is going to come up tomorrow.
Yeah, and I have had Christians bring up that same example and say, well, you don't know it's going to come up tomorrow.
Yeah, true.
And like that's true, but I have a long history of sunrises to point to. And for Christianity, I know you think you have something like that. Like you think you have these prophecies that have been fulfilled, so you feel confident that this other prophecy of Jesus coming again is going to be fulfilled. But in reality, you don't, and that's a whole separate video. But it's just fallacious to try and equate the two. They're not the same thing.
Two different meanings.
Imagine that you tell me, if you believe that there's an invisible pink unicorn in the sky, I'll give you a new BMW. I see the car in the parking lot. You jingle the keys in your hands. If I can believe what you want me to believe, the new car is mine. Cool. But it's a waste of time. I know there's no unicorn. No matter how much I want that car, I am incapable of believing something contrary to reason in order to get it.
Absolutely, Holly. And this is, I think, the only time I'm going to agree with you in this video series. But, I mean, that is a much more eloquent way of putting it than I usually put it. But it's basically exactly what I've said all along. I think I use a black coffee mug. I was at a Q&A at a church, and it was just a panel of atheists, and it was the first time most of that congregation had ever met one. And so during the Q&A, someone asked, it was something Pascal's wagery, just why don't you just choose to believe? And then I gave him the example, and I had a black coffee mug, and I said, listen, could you for 30 seconds truly believe that this coffee mug is red? And he surprised me with his answer. He said, yeah, I can do that. Really? So I said, I even set my watch. I said, okay. And I gave him 30 seconds. And then at the end I said, okay, what color is this coffee mug right now? He goes, black. What color was it during that 30-second period? It was red. So he totally got me flat-footed. He left me flat-footed. I was not expecting that answer. My point, which he totally destroyed my point, was that you really can't choose to believe. It's a realization. It's not a choice.
Yeah, and I'll give her... I agree with this particular statement, absolutely, and I'll give her credit that of all the... She brings out a lot of the same old arguments for why people convert, cosmological, moral, we'll get into those, but one of them is not Pascal's wager. Because like you said, you can't choose to believe anything, and God knows if you're faking it. So I'll give her the minor props for not falling for at least one BS argument.
Right?
Atheist Edge.
Oh my gosh, there's like a truck going by. It's so loud.
Walking the edge of what some consider offensive. But your feelings don't matter here. Only facts.
Then I was looking for something. Purpose, meaning, satisfaction. But since I did not then believe that God existed, I did not, and indeed could not, it did not. Mother Jesus.
Edgy commentary on the dangers of doctrine, the foibles of faith,
And indeed could not occur to me that what I was searching for could be found in God. Why is this the worst paragraph in the world?
the bullshit of belief, the stupidity of superstition, and the idiocy of indoctrination.
God. This is painful.
With razor-sharp wit, curiosity, and critical thought, we take an unblinking look at today's religions.
Whew. Why was that so hard?
We are Atheist Edge.